The storm started just after midnight. By the time Amarisé Kioni Zubéra reached the top executive floor, thunder was shaking the glass walls of Haldon Tower, and rain streaked down the windows like restless fingers trying to get inside. She preferred nights like this. Storms made the building feel less empty, less lonely. Evander Croix Haldon's office was the last one on her list. It always was. The air inside carried his presence, cold, expensive, controlled. She kept her head down as she had done for 5 years, wipe the desk, polish the glass, empty the bin, leave without being seen. Invisible. That was how she survived here. A sharp crack of thunder made her flinch. The cleaning cart rolled slightly, bumping into the wall. A large oil painting shifted crookedly. She froze. That painting had never moved before. Heart pounding, she stepped closer and gently adjusted the frame. It tilted farther than it should have. Behind it, a steel safe. Her breath caught. It was slightly open. She knew she should walk away. She should fix the painting and forget what she saw. But something pulled at her. Slowly, she knelt and opened the safe wider. Inside were neatly stacked documents, stamped and sealed, bank transfers, property deeds, legal files worth more money than she would earn in 10 lifetimes. And on top of them, a thick envelope. Her full name was written across it in bold, deliberate ink. Amarisé Kioni Zubéra. Dated 5 years ago. The exact day she was hired. Lightning flashed across the skyline. Her hands began to shake. Because in that moment she understood something terrifying. She had never been just a cleaner in this building. She had been something else entirely. By morning the storm was gone. But the shaking inside Amarisé had not stopped. For 5 years she had entered Haldon Tower through the service doors at the back, the ones that never saw sunlight. She signed in quietly, tied her hair back, put on her gloves and became part of the background. No one tried to pronounce her name correctly. To them she was just night cleaning. But Amarisé Kioni Zubéra had crossed an ocean to stand on those polished floors. She had left behind red soil and wide African skis, left behind a mother whose voice trembled with pride each time money arrived. Every month without fail she wired most of her salary home, school fees for her younger brothers, medication, rent, survival. Her apartment in the city was small enough that the bed nearly touched the stove. She didn't complain, she didn't dream loudly, she worked. In the daylight hours, Haldon Tower transformed into a kingdom of sharp suits and sharper words. Executives strode through the lobby like they owned gravity itself. Assistants moved in synchronized panic. Laughter was controlled. Smiles were strategic. And at the center of it all was Evander Croix Haldon. Tall, immaculate, unreadable. The kind of white man whose presence could silence a boardroom without him raising his voice. Employees feared his calm more than they feared anger. He was known for restructuring companies overnight, for buying failing empires and rebuilding them into fortresses. They called him visionary. They called him ruthless. They never called him kind. Amarisé had only seen him up close a handful of times, passing in the corridor, stepping out of the private elevator, the faint scent of expensive cologne lingering long after he was gone. He never looked at anyone for long. Except, sometimes she felt it. A pause, a wait, as though his eyes lingered on her just a second too long before moving on. She always told herself she imagined it. Why would a billionaire notice a cleaner? Their worlds existed in the same building, but on entirely different altitudes. He occupied the top floor with panoramic city views and silent glass walls. She worked beneath fluorescent lights, wiping fingerprints from desks she would never sit behind. He signed contracts worth millions before lunch. She calculated grocery prices down to the last coin. Invisible, that was her safety, that was her shield. But the envelope inside that safe had shattered that illusion. Because if she had truly been invisible, why had Evander Croix Haldon written her name in ink 5 years ago and locked it behind steel? For 5 years, Amarisé's nights followed the same quiet rhythm. Clock in, tie her hair back, gloves on, cartwheels whispering across marble. The executive floor always felt different after midnight. The arrogance drained out of it. The glass walls no longer reflected power, only darkness and city lights blinking like distant stars. It was the only time she could walk those corridors without lowering her eyes. She started with the conference rooms, long tables polished until they reflected the ceiling, chairs aligned perfectly, fingerprints erased from glass screens that had displayed decisions worth more than her entire village would see in a lifetime. Then the offices, one by one. And always she felt it. A subtle awareness. The small mechanical hum above her head, the faint click when she stepped into certain angles of the hallway. At first she thought it was paranoia, a side effect of being alone in a 40-story building. But sometimes, as she bent to empty a bin or leaned across a desk to wipe down a surface, a camera would tilt slightly. Not dramatically. Just enough. As though correcting its view. She would pause, look up at the black lens, and give a small, self-conscious smile before shaking her head at herself. Just security, she would whisper. Haldon Tower was known for its surveillance, sensitive deals, high-profile clients. It made sense. Still, it never felt random. Especially on the executive floor. Especially outside one office. Evander Croix Haldon's door was always the last she cleaned. She told herself it was a coincidence. Truthfully, she left it for last because the room unsettled her. It was too precise, too controlled. Even the silence inside felt expensive. She moved carefully in that space, aware of every sound she made, straightening files, dusting shelves, aligning the pen on his desk exactly where it had been. Sometimes she would feel it again there. That awareness. Stronger. As if she wasn't alone. Miles away, or maybe not so far, a private screen glowed in a darkened penthouse office above the city. Evander sat alone more nights than anyone knew. The building's security grid spread across multiple monitors in front of him, entrances, elevators, hallways. And one camera feed that had remained bookmarked for 5 years. He never zoomed in unnecessarily. Never lingered in a way that crossed a line. He watched for patterns, for unfamiliar faces, for threats. He watched because 5 years ago, he had read a message that chilled even him. The girl saw too much. Since then he had adjusted her shifts personally, restricted access codes, rotated guards without explanation. He knew when she arrived. He knew when she left. He knew she sent money home every month. He told himself it was a strategy, responsibility, protection. But when she paused beneath the camera and looked up, almost as if she could sense him, something unfamiliar would tighten in his chest. And he would remind himself of one rule he had never broken. She must never know she was being watched. Because the moment she understood why, everything would change. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. Amarisé sat on the floor of Evander's office, the storm still raging beyond the glass walls, her pulse loud in her ears. For a long moment, she only stared at her name written across the front in bold, deliberate strokes. Not cleaning staff. Not employee. Her full name. Spelled correctly. Carefully. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. Inside were documents thicker than anything she had ever held, official, stamped, signed. The first page made her breath catch. A trust fund. Established 5 years ago. In her name. The number at the bottom didn't look real. She blinked once, twice. It didn't change. It was more money than she could comprehend, more than her family had seen in generations. Her chest tightened. She flipped to the next document. A secured property deed. A fully paid residence in a gated estate outside the city, transferred quietly into her ownership under a protective holding agreement. The acquisition date matched the trust. 5 years ago. The day she was hired. Her thoughts began to spin. This wasn't charity. This wasn't a mistake. This was preparation. The final document was different, thinner, more direct. A protection directive. Legal language precise and cold. In the event of incapacitation, disappearance, or death of Evander Halden, Amarisé Kioni Zubéra is to be relocated immediately under private security protocol. All trust assets are to be released. She is to be safeguarded at all costs. At all costs. The words seemed to echo in the silent office. Her throat went dry. Why would a man like him, a billionaire who barely acknowledged her existence, prepare for her safety in the event of his death? Her mind raced through every interaction they had ever had. The brief glances in hallways. The subtle pauses. The security cameras adjusted when she moved. 5 years. 5 years of something she hadn't understood. A small folded sheet slipped from the stack and fell onto the carpet. She picked it up slowly. It wasn't legal language. It was a single sentence in Evander's unmistakable handwriting. If I fail, she must not pay for what she unknowingly heard. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Unknowingly heard. The storm outside cracked with thunder, as if the sky itself was reacting. Amarisé's memory strained. 5 years ago, her first week, late at night, voices in a boardroom she hadn't meant to overhear. A door slightly open. Men arguing in low, urgent tones. She had dismissed it, told herself it was none of her business. But someone else hadn't. Someone had noticed. And instead of erasing her, Evander had built a safety net beneath her life. Her hands shook harder now, not from fear alone, but from the terrifying realization that her entire existence in this building had been orchestrated. She wasn't here by accident. She had been placed, protected, prepared for something that hadn't happened yet. And if there was a plan in case he died, what danger was still alive? Amarisé had never done this before. Never dared, never imagined she could. The daytime floors of Halden Tower were a different world. Sunlight poured through the glass atrium, bouncing off polished marble and the brass accents of 100 offices. Executives strode by with clipped steps, phones pressed to ears, eyes sharp, words sharper. The lobby buzzed with ambition, tension, and the low hum of power. And in the midst of it all, she walked. No cart, no gloves, no excuse, just her in a simple uniform that had become invisible over 5 long years. Heads turned almost immediately. Secretaries froze mid-step, papers paused mid-air, eyes darted toward her. Whispers raced through the hallways. Everyone knew that no cleaner ever entered the CEO's office during business hours. Except today. She didn't hesitate. The heavy oak door loomed ahead, the handle cold beneath her fingers. Her chest was tight, but her steps were steady. For 5 years she had bowed and sidestepped, pretending she didn't notice the building, the cameras, the man who moved through it all with such absolute control. Today she would no longer be invisible. She opened the door and stepped inside. Evander Halden looked up from his desk, as if sensing a disturbance in the world itself. His eyes, normally so unreadable, flickered with a micro-expression that froze her for a heartbeat. "You shouldn't be here," his voice said, low, calm, unshakable. "I need answers," she replied. Her voice, though steady, carried the tremor of 5 years of silence and fear and confusion. She set the envelope of documents on his desk with deliberate force. It slid across the polished surface like a small avalanche of truth. The papers were impossible to ignore. The stamps, the seals, her name in bold ink, they screamed questions that could no longer be whispered in the dark. Evander leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, studying her the way one might study a puzzle that has refused to reveal itself for years. "Explain this," she said, her eyes locked on his. "Why is my name on these documents? Why have you been hiding this from me?" The office was silent except for the faint hum of the city outside, the only sound a clock ticking somewhere behind the walls. For a long moment neither moved, neither spoke. The air felt electric, heavy, filled with years of unspoken truths and secrets too dangerous to name aloud. The staff outside lingered, unsure whether to intervene, terrified to break the invisible boundary they had all respected for so long. Evander's hands, resting on the polished wood, flexed once, twice in thought. His eyes, pale and piercing, never left hers. "You were never just a cleaner," he said finally, his tone calm but carrying the weight of decisions made in shadow. You've been at the center of something far bigger than you realize. Everything you've seen, everything you've done has been under my watch. Her pulse surged, a mixture of fear, disbelief, and a strange, dawning clarity. For the first time in 5 years, the barrier between them shattered. And nothing would ever be the same. Amarisé's hands trembled as she sank into the leather chair across from Evander's desk. The envelope lay between them, heavy with years of secrets she had never imagined could exist in her world. The polished surface reflected the fluorescent lights above, but it could not hide the truth now glaring back at her. Evander's gaze was steady, unflinching, as if he had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. "You need to know the truth," he said, his voice calm, but every word carried the weight of something she had never been prepared to hear. 5 years ago, during your first week here, you overheard something you weren't meant to hear, he began, his tone measured, deliberate. A late board meeting, confidential, restricted, powerful men, decisions about investments that weren't exactly legal. Amarisé froze. Her mind raced, trying to recall that night. She had been delivering files to the conference room. The door had been cracked, voices low, hushed, urgent. She remembered the heat of fear rising in her chest when she realized she had stumbled into a world far larger than her own. And then she had left quietly, hoping no one noticed her presence. Evander continued. Those men decided that you had seen too much, that you had to be removed, silenced before anyone could speak, before anyone could connect the dots. The words hit her like ice water. Her breath caught. The quiet building, the endless nights of cleaning, the invisible life she had lived, all of it suddenly felt like a threadbare veil covering a chasm of danger she hadn't even known existed. "I found out," he said softly, almost as if apologizing to her before they could act. "I couldn't risk your life, so I intervened. I moved you to the night shifts, kept you isolated, adjusted the cameras, rotated security. I created the trust fund, the property. Every precaution you now see in those documents was meant to protect you from the moment I realized you were at risk." Amarisé's fingers curled around the envelope as though it could anchor her to reality. "All these years, you were protecting me." Her voice was barely a whisper. Evander leaned forward, eyes unblinking, pale irises glinting under the office light. "Yes, but you must understand, you were never to know. Knowledge would have made you a target again. Awareness would have put you in danger. I kept the truth from you because ignorance was your shield. My watchfulness was the only barrier between you and them." She felt a mix of fear and awe, a dizzying combination that twisted her stomach. 5 years. 5 years of careful observation, hidden hands, unspoken protection. Every moment of invisibility, every small glance she thought she imagined had been real. And now, the world she had thought she understood was gone. She was no longer just a cleaner, no longer invisible. She had been the center of something dangerous, and someone had been watching over her the entire time, a man whose power could crush or protect, and whose decisions had shaped the very course of her life without her knowing. The room seemed smaller now, heavy with secrets, with unspoken truths, with a reality that felt both terrifying and, strangely, exhilarating. "You survived," Evander said quietly, almost more to himself than to her, "and that's all that mattered." Amarisé's heart pounded as the magnitude of his words sank in. She had survived, but now everything she had known about her life, about him, about this building, about herself, was about to change forever. Evander's gaze never wavered as Amarisé tried to process the words he had just spoken. The storm of realization inside her chest had only just begun to settle, replaced now by a slow, creeping awareness of how carefully her life had been orchestrated without her consent. "You need to understand why I hired you," Evander said, his voice low but sharp, precise, almost surgical in its delivery. "Not because you were a cleaner, not because I admired your work ethic, but because you were at risk. And the moment I realized that, I had to act." Amarisé leaned back slightly, the envelope still clutched in her hands. Her knees trembled under the weight of revelation. "I don't understand. If I was in danger, why keep me here? Why not send me away somewhere safe?" Evander's pale eyes darkened. "Because the threat wasn't something that could be solved with distance. The men who decided you had to disappear were powerful. They controlled investments, boards, connections across continents. Any attempt to move you out quietly would have drawn attention, and they would have followed." He paused, letting her words, her disbelief, hang between them. "So I kept you here, night shifts, limited contact. Cameras adjusted subtly to watch over you without making you aware. Every schedule, every change in your duties, every small observation you thought was routine, It was designed to keep you alive, invisible to them but never unprotected. Amarisé's throat tightened. 5 years of silent nights, of polishing floors and emptying bins while powerful men conducted their deals above her head, had been carefully choreographed by the man sitting across from her. Every so-called coincidence, every random security adjustment, every moment she felt eyes on her, had not been random at all. And the trust fund, she whispered almost to herself, the property, the money. Yes, Evander said, leaning back in his chair. Everything you see in those documents was part of it. I built a life for you without you knowing it because knowledge itself could have put you at risk. The trust fund, the property, the legal documents, they were your safety net, prepared in case I failed. Amarisé's hands shook. You planned for me in case something happened to you. Evander's jaw tightened. I did. Every precaution, every adjustment, every choice over the past 5 years has been with one goal in mind, ensuring you survive. You were never just a cleaner, Amarisé. You were someone I had to protect, someone I would not allow them to harm, even if they were more powerful than I. She swallowed hard, the room feeling suddenly smaller, heavier. 5 years of life she had thought was her own had been shaped, guided and guarded by a man she barely knew, a man she had never dared look at too closely. And now the truth was undeniable. She had been living in a fortress built around her without her consent. Her pulse raced. Fear, gratitude, and something else she couldn't name all swirled inside her chest. She had survived. She had been protected. And she had no choice now but to face the reality that her life, her identity, and her future had been entirely controlled by Evander Halden, whether she liked it or not. For the first time, she realized that survival had a price, and that price had been carefully, deliberately, silently paid for 5 long years. Amarisé's hands clenched around the edge of the desk, the polished wood pressing into her palms. Her pulse raced, each beat a drum of anger and disbelief. 5 years. 5 years she had believed she was invisible, unimportant, a shadow no one noticed. And all the while someone had been orchestrating her life, keeping her safe, pulling strings she couldn't even see. You lied to me, she said, voice trembling but firm. You let me believe I was nothing, that I was just a cleaner, a nobody in this building. All the while you were watching me, controlling me, planning for me. Evander's gaze didn't waver, but there was a flicker there, a hint of guilt, a crack in the wall he had built around himself. I kept my distance for a reason, he said slowly, measured as though choosing each word carefully. If anyone suspected I cared, it would have put you in immediate danger. Emotional attachment is a vulnerability. It's the first thing they would have exploited. That's why I stayed apart, that's why I never spoke to you, never drew attention to you, so that you could survive. Her jaw tightened, and all the small glances, the cameras, the schedules, you treated me like I was expendable, like some experiment, and I had no idea. No, he said, his voice softening ever so slightly, you were never expendable. I just couldn't afford for you to know that. You became the only thing in this building I could not allow to be touched, but showing it would have been the death of you. Protecting you meant staying distant, cold, indifferent if anyone else was watching. Her chest ached with a mix of betrayal and a strange, growing understanding. The walls of the office, the polished floors, the glass and steel, it all felt like both a prison and a fortress. For her entire adult life in this building, she had been invisible by design. And yet, somewhere beneath the carefully orchestrated distance, she had become more than a protected object. You cared about me, she asked, almost whispering, the words tasting like both accusation and hope. Evander paused, pale eyes holding hers in a way that made her stomach flip. Yes, he admitted carefully, almost reluctantly. Somewhere along the way it wasn't just about protection anymore. You became someone I couldn't ignore, not just a life to guard, but someone I respect, someone I couldn't risk losing for any reason. Amarisé felt a tremor run through her, part disbelief, part something she couldn't yet name. For 5 years she had thought she was nothing, a faceless worker in a world that didn't care. And now, for the first time, she realized she had meant everything to the one person who had the power to change the course of her life with a single decision. The room fell silent. The storm outside had faded into a soft drizzle, but inside the air felt thick with unspoken truths, confessions, and the tension of realization. For the first time, Amarisé understood that she had never been invisible. She had only been hidden, protected in ways she had never imagined. And the man across from her, whose cold reputation filled the halls like a shadow, had been keeping her alive with a care she had never dared to hope for. But now, knowing the truth, she had to ask herself, Did survival mean everything if it came at the cost of being left in the dark for all these years? The quiet tension that had settled over Amarisé like a fragile shield shattered within days. She had barely begun to process the truth of Evander's protection when the first signs of danger appeared. It started with subtle shifts, an unusual number of messages flagged on her phone, emails marked urgent with no sender, and odd, untraceable calls that hung in the line like shadows. Then the emails became threats, anonymous, deliberate, every word carefully chosen to unsettle, to remind her she had crossed a line she wasn't meant to cross. "You don't belong here, step back or you will regret it." Her pulse spiked as she reread it, the handwriting digital yet with an edge felt personal, close, knowing. And she realized with a chill that someone knew she now understood, someone who had always thought she would remain in the dark. Evander watched her closely that night in the office, his jaw tight, pale eyes narrowing. "It's begun," he said quietly, almost to himself but loud enough for her to hear. "Someone on the board has realized you know the truth. They're trying to regain control. They see you as a threat." Amarisé swallowed, heart hammering. "I thought it was over. I thought the trust, everything you did would be enough." "Protection can only go so far," he replied, standing and packing the office. "The moment they know you are no longer invisible, you are now a liability, and they will do whatever it takes to silence you." Her mind raced. 5 years of careful survival, 5 years of relying on invisible safety, and now the walls she thought were impenetrable were cracking. It wasn't just words. She noticed the subtle sabotage around her, files on her desk rearranged, security logs manipulated, elevator access codes that she had memorized suddenly denied her entry. Someone had been watching her too, and they were learning fast. The threat was no longer abstract. It was real, immediate, personal. Evander moved closer, resting a hand lightly on the envelope containing her life's precarious safety. "You won't be alone this time," he said, voice steady but cold. "Every move they make, I'll be one step ahead, but you need to understand they are relentless and they will not hesitate." Amarisé's fingers tightened around the stack of documents. She could feel the weight of her own life in her hands, the consequences of 5 years of hidden truth pressing down on her like a living thing. For the first time, the building she had once walked through in anonymity felt like a battleground. Every hallway, every corner, every locked door seemed to hum with unseen eyes and whispered threats. And in that moment, she realized survival had a new meaning. It wasn't about cleaning floors anymore or staying invisible. It was about navigating a labyrinth of power, betrayal, and danger, fully awake, fully exposed. She looked at Evander, a silent understanding passing between them. Whatever came next, they would face it together. But one thing was clear: the threat had awakened, and the world that had once protected her was now a battlefield she could no longer ignore. Evander closed the office door behind them, the hum of the city below fading into a dull, distant pulse. He turned to Amarisé, his expression unreadable, pale eyes calculating every nuance of her posture, every tremor in her hands. "I've made arrangements," he said finally, his voice steady but carrying the weight of command. "A new identity, offshore accounts, a secure residence halfway across the world. You won't have to worry about this building, the board, or anyone who might come after you. You'll be safe, financial security for life." Amarisé looked at him, her heart pounding. Safe, comfortable, invisible. That was everything she had been trained to value in these 5 years: silence, survival, anonymity. And yet she couldn't accept it. "I can't," she said quietly, but with firmness that startled even her. "I've survived this long hiding in the shadows, but I won't disappear while they continue to harm others. I won't run while they manipulate, steal, and threaten lives. I won't let them think I'm just another ghost they can erase." Evander's eyes narrowed, searching her face for hesitation. "It's dangerous, they're powerful, relentless. If you stay, you're a target again, you could." "I know," she interrupted, voice rising slightly with conviction. "I know exactly what I'm risking, but running isn't surviving anymore, it's surrendering, and I refuse to surrender to people who have lived on lies and corruption for far too long." He studied her, a slow, deliberate assessment that made her feel naked and defiant all at once. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. "Very well," he said, tone low, deliberate. "If you are willing to stand in the open, then you must be prepared for everything that comes with it. Fear, scrutiny, opposition, even betrayal." Amarisé felt the weight of his words, but also an unexpected surge of power. She had spent 5 years believing she had no choice. 5 years thinking that invisibility was her only weapon. Now, standing in the office of the man who had watched over her silently for half a decade, she realized that knowledge and courage could be sharper than any blade. Together, they began assembling the evidence. Files that Evander had secretly collected over the years, boardroom recordings, email trails, bank transfers, emerged like pieces of a puzzle that had long been hidden in the shadows. Every piece meticulously documented, every detail irrefutable. For the first time in her life, Amarisé felt the balance shift. She wasn't just protected anymore, she had a voice, a choice, and a power that could dismantle the empire of lies that had nearly destroyed her. When the moment finally came, they walked into the public forum together. Cameras flashed, executives froze, board members paled, and Amarisé, once invisible, stood in the center of it all, her name spoken aloud, her presence undeniable. For the first time in years, she was no longer hiding, she was no longer a shadow, she was the storm itself. And nothing would ever be the same. The city buzzed with news of the arrests, the scandal spreading like wildfire. Headlines screamed the downfall of board members who had once seemed untouchable, their power stripped away by evidence no one had dared compile. Until now. Amarisé Kioni Zubéra read the articles from her modest apartment, each word a confirmation that the danger had finally ended, that her courage had forced the corrupt to answer for their crimes. Weeks later, she walked into Haldon Tower again, not as a ghost among polished floors, not as a shadow slipping past silent cameras. This time she entered with purpose, her heels clicking firmly against the marble. Executives who once ignored her bowed their heads politely, unsure how to address the woman who had brought their empire to its knees. She paused at the door she had once feared, the door that had held both her life and her secrets. The brass nameplate gleamed under the fluorescent lights. It was no longer a blank plaque, no longer a sign of a space she had never belonged to. Her name was engraved in clean, precise letters. Amarisé Kioni Zubéra, Director, Global Ethics Division. A deep breath filled her lungs. 5 years of fear, of invisibility, of survival had led to this moment. She reached for the handle and pushed the door open. Inside, the office smelled of polished wood and faint leather. It was the same room that had once held Evander's carefully guarded presence, the same space where she had first discovered the envelope that had changed her life. But now it felt different. She didn't shrink. She didn't pause, she belonged. Evander Haldon was there, standing near the window, his expression unreadable but softer than it had ever been. He looked at her, and for the first time there was no mask, no distance, no cold calculation separating them. He had never hidden her from the world, but the world had never seen her either, until now. "You've earned this," he said quietly, voice carrying across the room, steady and sure. "Not because of me, not because of protection, because of what you've done, who you are, and what you've chosen to stand for." Amarisé allowed herself a small smile, the weight of years lifting just slightly from her shoulders. She had survived threats, deception, and fear. She had walked through shadows and storms and emerged into a life of her own making. "Thank you," she said softly but with conviction, "for giving me a chance to stand, not behind anyone, beside anyone, but as myself." Evander nodded, "And beside me if you choose." The office felt alive with possibility. The sunlight through the windows caught the edges of the nameplate, glinting against the polished surface. For the first time, Amarisé saw herself reflected, not as a cleaner, not as a shadow, but as a woman who had shaped her destiny. She sat at her desk, placing the envelope from years ago in a drawer. It had served its purpose. Her name was on the door, her life was hers, and the future, uncertain, dangerous, thrilling, was finally within reach. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious to the quiet storm that had reshaped one woman's world forever. Inside, Amarisé smiled, and for the first time she felt truly seen. The story of Amarisé Kioni Zubéra reminds us that true strength grows in patience, courage, and integrity. Even when invisible, standing up for what is right can transform fear into power. Survival is not enough. Our choices, actions, and principles shape our destiny. In the end, being seen and respected comes from believing in ourselves and refusing to hide from injustice.